remember that because, that was big if you're from Utah or Colorado. But I guess they did go ahead and declassify or, expose or whatever, put it out there that, yeah, people really believed that they were guilty and wanted them indicted.
Yeah, I think the charge had something to do. I mean, I was listening to this reporter's analysis, and the charge had something to do with the fact that the parents knew or should have known who was involved and they hid it or something like that. They were covering it up. The suggestion or the implication is that the son, who was, I think, 13 years old at the time, their son was the one who did the murder of the little girl. So
is that what they say? I mean, I've heard that before, but
yeah, that's what I heard on my way here driving to the station. That's the reporter's analysis of it. I haven't reviewed the case, but at least we know that that's an open case and that things may still go forward with that. Indictments may be, yeah. Possibly. Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to bring up was that the shooting that took place in Reno, Nevada by the 11-year-old boy who went into the school and shot the teacher, wounded two other 11-year-olds, and then turned the gun on himself. Are you familiar? Did you hear about that one?
I missed that one.
You missed that one. Well, you were buying shoes in Toronto.
That's a terrible story. I mean, they're so common anymore. It's just horrible.
It's just horrible. But today we have a very special guest, President Obama this week, actually last week, because Sunday starts the new week. So last week, President Obama hosted an LGBT Pride event at the White House. And so we're very delighted to have a lesbian activist, Kathy Brennan. And before I bring her on, let me tell you something about Kathy. She is a longtime lesbian activist in Baltimore, Maryland. She has been involved in numerous legislative campaigns, most notably the how do you say that? How come I can't say that word?
I don't know. I don't even know what word it is. Demonstration or what?
No, I should know this word. Discrimination. It was like my tongue was not working. The Anti-Discrimination Act of 2002, which banned discrimination based on sexual orientation in the workplace, in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Kathy Brennan also actively lobbied in support of Maryland House Bill 235 in 2011, which would have banned discrimination based on gender identity in employment and housing. And she currently focuses on advocacy on the eradication of gender stereotypes, the promotion of radical feminism. I'm going to have to ask her what that is, radical feminism, because I want to give a disclaimer. I'm not a feminist. I know you are, Roseanne, but I'm not. I mean, I'm not.
Well, you're getting into that whole semantics thing, though, and I understand it. Let's discuss that a little bit.
Okay, so she's promotion of radical feminism, which I'll ask her about, the defense of women-only space, and the fight against male violence against women and children. So, Kathy, welcome to Roseanne Live.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Well, you've been an activist for like great causes for a really long time. The first one, the one to end discrimination against people because of their sexual preference. How hard was that? How hard was that to get through?
So I moved to Maryland in 1995 and joined advocacy efforts as a lesbian avenger originally. And in the mid-90s, there was a bill introduced to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation, and it went nowhere for many, many years. Nobody took it seriously at all. It took years of education and campaigning and meeting one-on-one with folks to actually get them to realize this is something that needed to happen. Unfortunately, gays and lesbians in Maryland and also at the federal level can't claim discrimination protection based on sex discrimination. So we needed to create this new category. There was a commission that was established in 2000 after the failure of the bill. I think it was in the 1999 legislative session, and we went all around the state and gathered testimony from folks in all parts of Maryland, and, really spoke to the need to have this type of bill. But honestly, there's two factors that got the bill through. One was an impressive grassroots effort where folks, met with people and talked to them. And two, we had a champion and then Governor of Paris, Glendening, whose brother had died of AIDS. And he really carried that legislation on his back, and it ultimately culminated in a successful legislative victory, which is something I'm very proud of.
What about the other one about what was the second one? It was
yeah. So one of the things that happened during the campaign for the Anti-Discrimination Act that I just talked about was that we became aware, and there was an effort early on to include gender identity in the sexual orientation bill, and there were members of the transgender community who were annoyed and angry that their needs weren't being met. And I don't blame them for being annoyed and angry at all. And certainly I don't blame them for their advocacy to try to get the legislation to include gender identity. However, it wasn't going to happen in 2000, 2001, 2002. It wasn't politically going to happen. So
why do you think? Why not?
Homophobia. I mean, the reality with the transgender issue back in the early 2000s and the mid to late 1990s was, at least in Maryland, which, is my experience, the advocates, the gay rights advocates, and let me just be very clear, I have never worked for a gay rights organization. My advocacy has been as a volunteer. Like, I do this because I'm deeply invested in the gay community. I'm an out lesbian and have been for many, many years, and this is personal for me. The advocates themselves, the group here was called Free State Justice, it's now Equality Maryland, they were wholly unable to articulate what gender identity was. And the trans community at the time was also very small. So it was very easy for the advocates to say, look, we're making a political calculation that this isn't going to fly and we're going to move forward. Now that created a lot of bad and negative feelings, which is why in 2002, I stopped doing gay rights activism. I specifically stopped doing gay rights activism around this issue of gender identity because I saw how it was tearing apart the gay community from a legislative and political standpoint. One of the last things I did before I quit, though, was to assist in the effort to ban discrimination based on gender identity in 2002 in Baltimore City. So,
Did it pass?
Huh?
Did it pass?
It did pass, and at the time, Martin O'Malley was the mayor who I was on the board of the Gay and Lesbian Community Center here, and we had done a lot of advocacy work with him, and we had a good relationship with Mayor O'Malley, who is now the governor, and we continue to have a good relationship with the governor. So fast forward 10 years. We got the bill passed in Baltimore City. Fast forward 10 years. I hadn't done any work around this issue for 10 years. I took time off to 8 years. I took time off to have children and do other things. And I had a friend who was a trans man who worked at an institution in Baltimore City, and he was fired from his job. And he came to me and he said, this is outrageous. And I agreed. I said, this is totally outrageous. And I said, well, I'd be happy to represent you. And negotiating a settlement because this was in Baltimore City and there's a city law. So, we negotiated a settlement, and then he said he wanted to work at the state level. And I naively and forgetting, all the drama that this had caused, 8 years earlier, I was like, yeah, I'll help you because, I want to help my friend. And I got back involved. And that's when, House Bill 235, included prohibitions against discrimination in housing and employment. I think everybody agrees that discrimination in housing and employment is completely and wholly wrong in a civil society. It's not something that I support. It's not something that any radical feminist I know supports. It's certainly not something lesbians support. The problem, when I looked at the bill,
I just want to make the point here that, you are, up to this point in the story, you're pretty much a hero of the GLBTQ community.
I would never say that because
it's true. And other people regarded you as such because you did get laws changed and you knew how to get laws changed, which a lot of people are still struggling to figure that one out, but you did it. And they were good laws that you helped put in place, and for that, I think you should be thanked, and I'm sure you have been.
Well, I thank you for that. And there are hundreds of people who pushed that legislation, and it takes, working coalition to do this. And, this is, not to jump ahead, but this is part of the reason why the fact that folks are so fractured and folks are so willing to immediately hate someone who doesn't agree with you 100%. It's very frustrating because that is not how you build a political coalition to get stuff done at all. It's incredibly ignorant, short-sighted. So back to House Bill 235, I agreed to help before I read the legislation because I was helping my friend. I read the legislation, and the bill had the same definition of gender identity that I, as a lawyer and as a feminist, have a big problem with. Essentially, the definition, and this is something that Bess Hungerford and I wrote about in the letter to the United Nations, which I know created a huge, can I curse?
No.
Okay. Created a huge brouhaha of upsetness. The definition of gender identity is circular, and it's subjective. It essentially says gender identity means a gender-related identity regardless of your sex at birth. So there's variations on that by state, but it essentially boils down to the idea that there are ways of being that correspond with your sex at birth. So if you are born, female with a vagina, you're supposed to be soft and cute and demure. If you're born with a penis, you're supposed to be macho and tough and aggressive.
Well, those are stereotypes, of course, but they're like real, rooted in, the stuff that our generation and, all generations have grown up with because, fighting that program, talk about mind control, fighting that program of not being the, silent, helpful, nurturing girl was, part of, I look back as like it was just torture that I felt all the time that I was being forced to not be myself. I mean, in Salt Lake City, Utah. So, I understand it in that way that I'm against, I'm just against the program of gender, which, that's the whole other, that one's being, reconfigured, argued, fought about, but, I don't think that